Okay, well, then I can start. My name's Hannah Brown. I'm from Brown Creative Consulting, which is a small business management consulting firm. I focus on small firms, usually with less than 20 people in the firm. And I've been working, I come from the background of having been trained in a master's of architecture, but I worked within firms for about 15 years as marketing person, HR person, financial management person, and also project person once in a while when they could strong arm me into designing. And I'm coming to you from Richmond, California, and I primarily work with firms in the Bay Area, although many of them have been expanding and have some presence in other parts of the country now. And I'm happy to be here, and we're planning a format that hopefully will be pretty interactive. We don't have lots of slides and pieces, but we're hoping to hear from this group a little bit about their thoughts and concerns about what it would be to start a practice and where they are and their endeavors and ventures. And we'll try to keep the conversation pretty dynamic and lively, hopefully, with that in mind. So I'll turn it over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Hannah. My name is Michael Bernard. I am the founder of Virtual Practice Consulting. I'm a licensed architect in California. I've been practicing for more than 40 years. And about 20 years ago, I shifted my focus to the culture of practice and roles and responsibilities in practice. So I focused more on the notion of practice as a design project, and we'll talk more about that. I'm delighted to share the screen today with Hannah, and mostly to hear from all of you about what concerns you have as you launch or as you launch your firms. So let's begin.
Yeah. So we thought that in order to get sort of the temperature of this Zoom room, we would start with a poll. Just trying to figure out and giving you all a few minutes to answer a few of our questions about where you are either in starting or launching a firm. Let me see. I'm going to launch it now and give you a few minutes to fill those out. Are you guys able to participate in the poll? Ah, there we go. All of a sudden, the number started coming. All right, it looks like we have about 76% completed. So I'm going to end it and share the results so we can look at this together.
Yeah.
There we go. So the first question was, do you have your own practice? And there's a resounding 75% already have their own practice, which is great. Are you thinking about starting your own practice? Yes, for about 69%. If you have your own practice, are you a sole practitioner or do you have a partner? 75% are sole practitioners and the other 25%. Doesn't look like anybody has a partner right now. If you have a practice, do you have contractors or employees? So it looks like primarily folks either it's just them if you're running your own practice or it's a combination.
It's 50-50. That's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And no one yet has an employee, so maybe we can spend a little time on that. What it takes to have your first employee, if that's of interest. Why do you or did you wish to launch a practice? We were very interested in the why of why start a practice for this group. It looks like 75% said flexibility or other goals like leadership or autonomy, and 44% with design goals or 31% with hitting a ceiling for work for others. And there's just a couple of comments coming in, like I decided to launch a design firm to build my knowledge and experience in running a practice. That's great.
That's a really great answer. Yeah.
So I think with those in mind, we wanted to just reflect a little bit. If anybody wants to jump in on why they started their own practice now, or what the concerns might be for them that you hope that we might cover today, I think plopping that in the chat or raising your hand and unmuting would be really helpful for us to hear. I think we hear, Michael and I hear a lot about folks starting their own practice either because a project landed in their lap and they have a new opportunity to maybe start out on their own. Or some folks do it for financial reasons, other people for flexibility. I started my own practice when my daughter was born because I felt like I would have so much more flexibility in my work schedule if I could shape my own day and not have to be at a desk at 9 o'clock. And I hear that from a lot of other women, is that they started their practice. Like, I think 9 of my clients who happen to be women, I counted once, all started their practice in the year that their children were born because they needed flexibility.
Naomi asked a very good question. Thank you, Hannah. I think that's a really good example, by the way, of what motivates us to start our own practices. Naomi asks, for how many of you was COVID a factor in starting your own practice? That's very interesting. That's in the chat. I'll be interested to hear what people's responses are to that question. It's very good.
So I think the other thing we were thinking about as Michael and I were talking this morning about the reasons for starting a firm, and that some folks start a firm very proactively. Like, I have an opportunity, I want to go out and start my own firm, so I'm ready to make that leap from probably a very stable position that you might already have in terms of having a steady paycheck as an employee. But others have come from a reactive standpoint of saying, oh, I just lost my job and now maybe I'm going to start a practice because I need to find opportunities. I need to make opportunities. And so they've come from a more reactive place. And we were just talking this morning about how important it is to us to start unpacking that with clients in terms of how is that a factor in what kind of baggage you bring. Like I was pointing out that I have one client that came from a firm that is pretty unhealthy and that I know of some bad practices that go on in that firm, and had that person inherited them as the norm because it's the only place that they've ever worked. And I have to do a lot of unpacking sometime of like, whoa, wait a minute, we can't do this like unpaid time off thing that you think you can do because that's not actually legal. Another thing is that we have to like look at very closely, because the practices they learned from their predecessor is really are really not practices that we want to sustain, or that are even sometimes legal to do.
Yeah. Well, and Hannah, you bring up a really good point. I'm working with a client in Los Angeles and the Bay Area that came from a national firm, and their work inspired others from that firm to join them. And by default, they created a replica of the culture they came from. And the question really is, okay, so you've extracted the good people and the great practices, but what infrastructure did you leave behind that made it great in the old place? It's a vulnerability. As you start your own practice, are you intentionally creating this infrastructure to support the work you do? Or is it a default? And the default is a little dangerous, because you may, without thinking about it, as Hannah was saying, integrate risky practices that may not seem risky because they came from where you used to work. Something to think about. So sift through, use a very fine filter when you think about every aspect of setting up your practice. Shall I put up the diagram, or what do you think?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think we can, we were going to talk a little bit about the how, and I'm seeing a question come in that's a little bit more about the nitty gritty of the how of running a practice. And so we were going to switch pretty quickly to that. And Michael, you have a great diagram if you want to share.
So what we have here, thinking back, Hannah and I actually, for many years taught professional practice at California College of the Arts. And one of the, we're very keen, we're very sensitive to the reality of graduate school or design school, that what we learn is exemplified in this top diagram, which is a grid of squares. The red P stands for project, and each of these is a project. And in school, that's all we learn. We think that projects are all of practice. But when you break them all apart, there's all this in the lower diagram, there's interstitial space that contains these projects. And the reality is the practice is a design project too. In that red circle are HR, finance, business development, culture, advancement, succession, recruitment, business, marketing and PR, all and many more, IT and Revit or not Revit or ArchiCAD, or all of that holds the projects together. And often we rely on this upper diagram as if that's all there is, and culture by default squeezes in there. A more expansive approach suggests that practice is a design project too.
That's great. And what I love about that project or that diagram, Michael, is that the project still have like a shape. Mm-hmm. And you've often said that when Michael and I teach together, we talk a lot about the four corners of a project, which are the fees, the schedule, the scope, and the budget. And how if one of those, like the schedule, gets lengthened, then all others have to change. The fees have to change. The scope probably already changed. And so we have to constantly keep those in alignment if we're going to have the right angles of those squares or rectangles.
So one more thing, did you have any other points to add, Hannah?
Well, I think I always talk about the operations, the three pieces that hold up the business, any practice. I think of them as the three-legged stool, with marketing being one, HR being another, and the financial management being the third. And what I always say is, like, people call me when one of the legs of the stool has fallen out and we have to correct it and start working on it. And my job, I think of often, is to look and pull back and say, well, which piece of the stool is tippy right now, and how do we attend to it? But we're always trying to keep all three kind of in alignment so that the stool, which holds up all the design and the projects, feels like it's on a nice steady platform to do beautiful work and to get the work done efficiently and with a lot of pride in the work from our employees, if we have them. So I'm always constantly thinking about how those three things align. And I have come to focus less and less on marketing over time, but I still stay kind of high in the sky, big picture with marketing with many of the clients that I've worked with for a long term. But the HR and the financial management, I learned very early on that because the payroll is our biggest, usually our biggest financial piece that we have to accommodate and pay for, that they putting HR and financial management together, to me, makes a lot of sense. And culturally, when you put both of those together, you can, if you focus on both with enough rigor, I feel like it does shape the culture of the firm quite a bit.
And starting really early with good I know it gets down into the weeds, but with integrating into that a rigorous billing practice, and it is a practice, so that you might say you commit to a day of the month or the business week that you will issue invoices. And I'm gonna go down a rabbit hole with this particular sensitive issue. Your practice cannot survive unless you are paid. Full stop. And we can talk more about that later. But if you pick a day and you commit to invoicing on that day, everything else falls to second place. So that early in the month, you do your invoicing, send out your invoices so that clients can organize the means to pay you. Keep in mind that clients have to move money around to pay you. It's not just sitting in a bank account. So if you bill a client $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 in a month, as per your agreement, yes, it says in your agreement that you'll be working this many hours and for this fee. But a client will find themselves having to move money out of a T-bill or out of a trust fund, or they have to ask their parents. I'm not kidding. The money comes from somewhere, but it's not always to hand. So the earlier in the month that you can prepare your invoices and send them, the earlier in the month your clients can pay you. And also not to let it slip a month or two, because now instead of a $10,000 bill, it's a $30,000 bill. And you catch the client who has goodwill, unable to pay you on time because now they have to move things, and maybe they took it out of stock and the stock market dipped and now that's worth less, and all these things. So your practice can't survive on goodwill. You really, a rigorous practice, and it's like a yoga practice. It's a practice. Pick a day, the 5th day of the month, whether it's the 5th business day or the 5th day of the month, pick a day, commit to it, and bill. End of rant.
Well, we both feel like that is very important. I actually try to, I do invoicing for a couple of my clients, and what we have set dates that it is like the first Monday of the month or the first Wednesday of the month, and that we're meeting every single on a monthly basis to go over draft invoices. And I've been using that also to train other people within that we're managing to make sure that their invoices or their time is completed. And if not, then they're getting like the nagging emails from me to say, hey, I need your time or I need your invoice because I'm about to start invoicing our clients. And if you don't get that to me, then I can't get, your hours on the invoice, and then I can't get you paid. And then we have a specific question there about how do you feel about holding off invoicing until certain project benchmarks are hit?
If that's your strategy, well, Hannah, I'm interested in your position, your point of view, and then I'll add mine.
Well, I love the monthly invoicing because there is a rigor to it, and you know that you're going to get a certain amount of your capital moving. And so I prefer to set it up that we're going to invoice on this monthly basis, as opposed to how a contractor does it, where they're saying, when we have these studs up, then we're sending you specifically the framing invoice. And when we have this up, we're going to send you this invoice. I do, however, like usually I draft all the invoices and I'm ready to hit send, say on the 6th of the month. But then there'll be one or two where we hold it, where we say, okay, well, we're about to invoice them for 50% of schematic, but the meeting's actually happening tomorrow. So then I wait like 3 days and I send them the invoice after that meeting's happened. But otherwise, I like to get the clients in the habit that the invoices are coming on this day and we expect them to be paid in either 15 or 30 days.
Right, because whether it's you or you and your employee waiting for a benchmark, you still have to pay your contractor or employee. It's better to have the money in hand and train your client, orient your client to monthly payment rather than a milestone payment. Because if it's a milestone payment and it's a 3-month endeavor, you're lending the client money. It becomes a spec opportunity. So it's risky. I'm not saying don't do it ever. Use your intuition. But the better thing is to keep the cash flow regular and maintain that financial relationship pretty steady with your clients.
The other thing I think we wanted to mention, backing off specifically from this topic, is one of the things that is really helpful as you start your own practice and as you're thinking about your practice is to know your own strengths and weaknesses. So some of the folks that I know that aren't as good at talking about money or aren't as rigorous with getting invoices out, I try to pair them or find them a bookkeeper who is very rigorous and who probably has in the past run their own business. And so they can talk to that principal about good business practices and why we invoice every month or why it's important to look at certain costs or otherwise. So I think, we always say like that within the practice, you have that whole bubble of the practice, but you can also have this array of consultants that you work with. It could be somebody like me and Michael, but it's also your bookkeeper, your accountant, your marketing consultant. And if maybe it's not, maybe it's a specific type of marketing consultant like business development or social media or public relations. There are people that are available to help in all of these facets and help, coach and create like good programs for each of those parts of the business.
Right. They're people to learn from rather than trying to invent it ourselves. I'm going to stick my neck out and say that as far as the Internal Revenue Service goes, we as designers and architects starting our own small businesses, we are the low-hanging fruit. We are like such easy marks for an audit that I strongly recommend that you find a good bookkeeper and accountant to organize your books. You can learn from them rather than you trying to do it yourself and then you get audited and it's a $2,500 ding. And that's right there is 6 months of bookkeeping. So, think about what you can learn from others who support you. Again, that gets back to building appropriate infrastructure for your practice. So you can focus on the things you want to do and not cut corners on the things that others do really well.
And the other thing I think is of hiring internally for some of those weaknesses too, because I feel like one of the, many of you may be thinking about hiring your first employee. And sometimes a person that will want to work with just a principal and be the first employee. I was actually one of them right out of school where I started with 2 brothers who ran a small practice and I was their first employee here in the Bay Area. And they had employees in the past, but I was the first one here. And so that tiny office, one of the first things they said to me was, Hannah, you got to figure out how to get yourself paid. We need a payroll. And so I was like, okay, great. I got to go research how the heck we do payroll. And do you guys want to be on payroll? Like, how are we handling that? So immediately I was like thrust into some of the overhead of, and I think one of my second tasks was, we need an office because we can't work out of the office we have in the academic building where we work. Now that we have you as an employee. So find us an office and how much can we spend on that? And what's our budget like? So I was immediately coming up with, confronted with all those kind of big questions, which I think as you're beginning your practice, we all so often begin small. And, I know many practices where people have, started their firm and just by taking on little side projects and weeding themselves off of the practice where they worked, 5 days a week as an employee, and then starting to say, oh, I only need to work 2 days a week or 3 days a week now because my practice is burgeoning. But then they get to a point where there's so much work and you're either considering contractors or employees, which is its own barrel of complications. I work with a lot of firms it's the sole proprietor and they call me just as they're about to hire that first employee. And some of the things I tell them about and to be aware of are just knowing that, you have new requirements that you have to do in terms of having a payroll and making sure that you can't just do an owner's draw and write a check to the employee. You get in trouble for that, and you got to have a real payroll going. And it's probably good practice to put yourself on there too. But then what does it look like for, you'll need to get workers' comp, like that's one of our requirements in California. And there's other things that aren't required. Like a lot of people come to me and the first thing they think when they're hiring an employee is, oh, we got to have a handbook. And I say, well, wait a minute, actually, here in California, you don't have to have a handbook, but if you do, you're required to have all this stuff in it, much of which won't actually be relevant because you're so small. So why don't we do like a benefits summary of like why it's beneficial to work here, which is going to be like 2 pages long to maybe 5 pages at the most, that explains how you want to deal with vacation time and sick time. Or do you want a PTO plan that lumps those two things together? And what holidays do you want to observe as a company and things like that? You probably have been winging it on as the sole owner, but now, as you take on that individual as an employee, that's going to be the first question they have is, well, how much vacation do I get? Do you offer health insurance? Do you have 401k? Which interestingly, now that we're here in California, the minute you have an employee now, you are required to have some kind of retirement plan or to opt into the Cal Savers program so that your employees can start planning for retirement from day one, pretty much. And then I think the other things, those are the big ones, like when you're transitioning from being by yourself to having employees that you need to think about. But we had questions come up in the chat about, could you please talk about transitioning from sole proprietor to a partnership? You want to take a little that one, Michael?
I'll take a stab. The big question is, have you truly, authentically vetted each other? And what are your strengths and weaknesses, and what are the strengths and weaknesses of your partner? And how do those two puzzle pieces fit together, or do they not? Remember, this is a business relationship. It has a financial obligation and liabilities involved. Be clear, it's more than one conversation. It warrants a retreat, a kind of partnering retreat where you can ask questions about, what are our mutual goals? What are our individual goals? What market sectors do we want to work on? Am I the managing principal and you're the designer, or is it the other way around? Or are we both designers, and how will we manage the firm? The other thing too is like how you set your billing rates as partners. Are you both on every project, or do you have alternating roles where one partner leads and the other one is in production, or is it yin and yang in that way? All these questions, this is worthy of a narrative that defines the roles of the partners. I don't know how long a firm, or what the longevity is of a small firm, but it's certainly going to have a longer life if the partners are truly transparent, authentic, and honest with each other. And like, where does the money come from? I can tell you from one example. a firm where the partners ultimately, a year into practice, decided they would pursue HRC certification with the city of San Francisco. And that required that partners reveal all of their financial holdings to the city. And this particular firm had always intended to get small firm, local firm status, but one of the partners decided that they didn't want to submit this private information. And so the business plan they had from the beginning couldn't materialize. So be really clear about what you want to do and what your goals are in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Is it about just the two of you? Is it about adding employees? If you add employees, you're creating a culture. What is that culture like? These are not trivial questions, because you'll be working together and signing drawings for each other for a long time. I think I'll be interested to hear what people have to say, but keep in mind that that you really need to be clear about what each other's going to do. One client that I'm working with argues all the time, but the arguing, the kvetching between the two of them is actually really productive conflict. And on the surface, you think, oh my God, how do these people get anything done? But the point is, that is their accepted means of communication. It looks weird on the outside. It's quirky and it's really effective. They have a ton of work and it's all really great. But be real about how you're going to communicate with each other. Leave apologies at the door and be really frank and authentic with each other as you step into this business arrangement.
Yeah, I would only add to that I worked for a long time for 3 partners, and they took those 3 buckets, the marketing, the HR, and the financial, and they divided amongst themselves so that each one was individually responsible. So if it was about hiring and recruiting, one of the HR partner was the one who was responsible for making sure that somebody was getting ads out and words out and new ideas for recruiting, new ideas for, and then he was actually the one that actually dealt with, like, oh, I've run out of PTO, but my grandma died. And so what do I do? Do we have bereavement leave? Like, you would have to go to him to ask those kind of questions. And then the other thing I was thinking as Michael was talking was how important it is to lay out your financial goals and your financial comfort zones, because I've seen a couple of partnerships dissolve because the one was a risk taker and the other one was extreme risk adverse. And so one wanted to spend money on things like a new website, which might cost $20,000 for the web developer and graphic designers. And the other one was like, no, I want that all in the bank because I think there might be trouble ahead. And so they were having trouble making like what should have been easier decisions because they weren't coming from the same place in terms of finances. And they couldn't find that way of speaking to each other about, well, how much do we have to have in the bank for this other person to feel comfortable so that we can make these other decisions and business goals happen, like the website or taking on a larger and more expensive rent, all those things that might challenge and become future challenges to that partnership. So I think it's really some partnerships, as I watched as a sole proprietor became a partnership. And so somebody actually bought into the corporation that already existed, which has its own, challenges, and usually involves a couple of attorneys, one for each side. And one of the big things that we learned was that the sole proprietor, the previous, sole owner of the corporation, we had to divest from our accountant, who was that person's personal accountant. And so that accountant stayed with that person, but then the corporation had to find its own accountant to help us through this merger of taking on a new partner. And then we talked quite a bit with an attorney who helped us shape how would bonuses be structured at the end of the year? Like, how much money are we comfortable? Like, do we have to have one whole month's expenses in the bank? and that we keep as savings for the month of January, which might be slower. And then the rest we look at as our bonus pool. And then how do we divide the bonus pool? Because part of, as a corporation in California, one of the things you learned is if you say at the end of the year we have $100,000, we have to split it 50-50. And so one partner is getting 50 and the other person's getting 50, unless you have some kind of other agreement that you know, actually no, first 50% should go to all the employees. And then there's 50% left over that the two partners divide 25% each. And so we kind of spelled all of that out very clearly so that every year it wouldn't be a new decision or a new process.
That's great, Hannah. That's a prime example of clarity that gets lost until it happens. And then there are disappointments, to say it mildly, because we didn't understand the spirit of the regulation or the requirement. I want to add one more thing, and that is every partnership eventually ends. Every partnership ends. Every partnership ends because a partner sells or dies or goes out for a pack of cigarettes and a carton of milk, and you never hear from him again. You know, so I think the key thing here is to meet with an attorney or through the state and get and arrange to create a buy-sell agreement, an incorporation agreement. So it's very clear before you even hit one key that, you know, before you draw a line, that you have a business agreement in place. It's just good practice anyway. And just so always, you can do it through Nolo Press, but I recommend that, you know, you find legal counsel and get registered with the state as a corporation, as an S Corp, or I think that's the best thing. But that you have a buy-sell agreement so that if one partner wants to leave, they're not held hostage if they decide, or you decide to part company. There's two questions from Caleb. How do you approach a situation where your prospective partner might be too similar to a point where we might be redundant? That comes out of deep discussion. What does redundancy really mean? Maybe you're like a high-powered two-person firm in the market sector you choose. It really depends on how you can market your services. If it's a really big market, maybe the two of you are required. If you are, you know, even using the term might be redundant, there's already a caution flag there that you need to work out. It might be great to work together, but will you be competing for work between you? So you have, that's, again, that's the value of having a retreat, to just a partnering, you know, retreat to figure out what you could be as partners.
I also would say too that redundancy, it feels like sometimes that's can be quite superficial, where it's like you're very similar in terms of design, aesthetics, and goals. But then if you ask about, well, at the end of the year, if we have $100,000 in the bank or even $10,000 in the bank, what are we doing with it? Like, you will come, I think, up against personal differences that are very good to talk out. And so sometimes it helps by talking through examples. I learned that with working with, I'm thinking of a client right now where the two partners superficially look very, very similar in terms of, yeah, you'd say these people are really well matched because they are very similar. But when you dive deep, like there's some interesting things, like one has dyslexia, so she doesn't write any of the proposals. So the other person writes the proposals. And because of the dyslexia also affects how they see numbers. So the other person deals with all the numbers. And that big picture decisions, like, hey, how do we design like the whole culture of the firm? That person with dyslexia is actually very, very, very capable of like finding these really interesting ways through complicated, sometimes HR problems, and just seeing like the crux of the problem and saying, this is how we solve it. And they complement each other very nicely.
There's another place, like, does redundancy mean you're both licensed, or is there an advantage? That's a key thing, is one of you licensed and one not? And what's the impact of that if like, how do you agree on things? If one person is given the responsibility of signing everything that leaves the office, but the other partner is deemed irresponsible because they never deliver on time or it's not complete, and you are now de facto responsible for their product, that's something to talk about. If one of you is licensed and the other is not, and you're a partnership, California allows you to have that partnership. Where I am in New York, it's not, it depends on the size of the firm. You can't always do that. So look into whether that's even possible. What's the current legal requirement for partnership in architecture firms? James asks, is it better to start from ground zero with local house projects, or is it better to raise funds to buy into an existing partnership? Well, yes and no. Hannah, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I was thinking, most of the partnership I've seen that are really successful usually come from some sort of matchmaking where there's some, there's some commonality. It's not like hiring a new employee. In fact, as somebody who does a lot of interviews, I get a little like frightened when the first question out of the person's mind is there room for partnership for me? And it's like, wow, this is our first hour together and you're already thinking about partnership in the firm, when I'm just trying to figure out if you're culturally a fit, design-wise a fit, efficiency and productivity-wise a fit. And so this seems like really early in the dance to start talking about partnership, especially for small firms who I think a lot of principals sort of the firm is part of their identity of like, I own my own business. And so somebody asking to buy in right away might actually be challenging to them or threatening in some way deep down. So it'd be hard to have that conversation. Meanwhile, I think it's always interesting to bang on doors and sort of approach people that you know of, that you feel this symbiosis with, about what are the likelihood that you and I could partner together in the future, maybe on a project or on a venture or in sharing employees, because both of us are at that point where you and I, we have 3 projects to do between us, but we're working with contractors. And if we put ourselves together in some way, maybe we can do a unique agreement where we share an employee. And that might be better and more efficient for all of us. And so maybe is there some way to start building something in that way? So I think both are usually long-term projects.
It's dynamic. The conversation doesn't stop.
Yeah.
That's key. I think, the other thing is, in the spirit of the conversation doesn't stop, I propose that you consider, if you're bringing on a partner, that you set from the very beginning at least a weekly meeting to discuss the banal things of practice. Mm-hmm. That conversation you have on a weekly basis, even in the absence of employees, those are the building blocks of the culture of your practice. Whatever you believe in, whatever you say, whatever you put on your website, the reality is the way you talk to each other every week is your culture. All the rest is good marketing. The way you talk to each other is your culture. And I will tell you that a lot of partnerships never speak to each other. They just show up at the office and they start work. And that is a culture too. Is that the culture you want? Doesn't mean you have to be super chatty. Talk about the practice, talk about the work. And on a quarterly basis, have a meeting that's a little longer. Have a retreat to talk about where we are. It's like hiking. You get to a place and you get to a place where you can kind of look out over things. You get a little elevation. Where are we in our projects? How are we doing financially? What practices like forecasting do we need to improve upon? What other things do we need to think about? Should we set up design standards? Or the point there is to integrate a practice of intention, that your practice is going to evolve over time. And I've worked with some firms for 15 years as an advisor, firms that started with a small remodel that are now designing $40 million houses, or designing multifamily, or designing any number of different kinds of building types. And they started by talking, because it is, this conversation is a part of architecture. So do it with intention, and build in benchmarks where you talk at a higher level than just the week to week.
We had an early question that I want to jump back to.
Yes.
Aaron, it was about pricing services, saying I struggle to accurately estimate and price services. I'm interested in knowing best practices. And the other one was financial metrics, of understanding how to set up and utilize financial metrics to inform business decisions as far as taking on certain types of jobs and employees. I can definitely speak to number two. Michael and I were even talking about how I've been over the years, like I've been a big proponent of ArcGIS as a time tracking and invoicing software, because I learned so much about what the employees are doing, how long it takes them to do things, how long it takes for a project, whether or not the firm is asking for ad services, how they're billing, how a project that's set up as hourly performs versus one that's set up on a fixed fee. All those things I can look at in something like ArcGIS. And I just started using last year another software called Monograph, which is similar to ArcGIS, and it's doing similar things. It's, time tracking, expense tracking, invoicing, and those, I feel like those, and a good QuickBooks file, or if you're using Xero or something similar, the two together will give you a great financial picture, because one is looking at projects in depth, which QuickBooks really doesn't do unless you set up estimates and budgets, and most firms don't want to delve into that can of worms with QuickBooks, when it's just as easy to do it in something like ArcGIS or Monograph or Harvest, where it's more visual.
Well, I would like to respond to, thank you, Hannah. I want to underscore that Hannah is just a fantastic resource for Monograph or whatever software you use. It is your periscope into how your practice works. The meta is, there are a lot of resources to employ to your advantage, and there are people in front of those resources who can guide you. So keep that in mind. I think about pricing services, there are a couple different ways to do it. The first is, like we can talk in depth about this. It is very difficult. The AIA does not allow AIA members to talk about how we price our services. We'll just set that on the table to consider. But the best way is to look at how many hours you think it will take to do something, and consider it in two different ways. One is the top down, where you look at how many hours you think it'll take and how many weeks it will take by phase, and then look at that at times your look at the hours times your billing rate, high level, back of the envelope. What is the percentage of fee that represents compared to the construction cost? And the other way is the bottom up. So it's more about whether, is it a task, is it a meeting, is it a administrative task? And you really get into the grain of how many hours and how many meetings and what kind of tasks by phase. And then you compare those two data points and see how far off they are. And they will be far off. You need at least two data points to see if you're in the park. I think that the key thing is, more than how you price your services, whether it's top down or bottom up, is to make sure you and the client are in alignment about what you're going to deliver and what they expect. I use the analogy of the Volkswagen, Audi, Porsche. Is your client expecting a Porsche and their budget only allows a Volkswagen? That's utter misalignment. Can you get to some place where they actually want a Volkswagen? I mean, maybe you want the Porsche and they want the Volkswagen. That's a bust. So So think about how you can get into alignment with a client. Start with that. And there's another thing to this that's really important. If you price your services and the client agrees and you begin schematic design, don't just respond with solutions as you evolve the design. This is really key. I think alignment between you and your potential business partner, alignment between you and your client, alignment is really important. It's a fundamental element of successful practice. What I mean is, I'll give you an example. You're designing a house for a client, it's a ground up. And the client is a pair of homeowners, and they want a double garage. And then actually they don't want to, one of them says they don't want a double garage. They want a single garage with an elevator to put the second car upstairs. No, actually we do want a double garage, but we want an ADU upstairs. No, actually we don't want that attached to the house. We want a separate structure. And you respond, even though you have a limited fee, with solution. The answer is no, stop right there. Elevate out of using solution to get through a problem. The problem isn't the solution. The problem is misalignment. So as you husband your resources, starting your practice, go back to the clients and be brave and courteous enough to say, you know, I think the problem here is that we're not in alignment. And you have this meeting in person, if you can, with everybody present, and say, you know, this is an issue of misalignment. Let's get into alignment. Before we produce 17 potential solutions, and in parentheses, you lose your fee, what will it take to get into alignment? That also is a way of calculating your fee. So here's a big question, and we have a few minutes left. So if you have questions, please put them on the chat now so that we can address them. Okay, Naomi asked what we think about FreshBooks.
I actually haven't had any experience with them yet.
Me neither. I don't know them. And then Aaron says, oh, good. Thank you, Aaron. All right. And then Caleb asks, one is an architect building scientist. The other is not licensed, talented technologist and building official on road to licensure. My interest in investing in technologies developed by the scientists and elevating the deliverables of said partner through incorporating technologies. Building scientist is holder of patents which can cause friction due to guarding of intellectual properties. It's complicated, but seeking an ideal approach. A lot of conversation there. I think that's how you will get through that. You know, sounds like you have interest in having some business structure together. Hannah, what's your thought?
Is this in reference to potential partners?
I think so. That's my sense. But
Okay. Yeah, I think, I think of it in terms of dating a little bit. I would probably date them both for a while and have dinners and lunches and conversations and really trying to hammer out which one is more in alignment. And as Michael so aptly brought up that word, in terms of some of your core values and who you can see building a long-term relationship with. Because I think both avenues will present opportunities and probably some potential frustrations. And one of the best challenges is discovering how in each situation you would resolve a conflict. So either bringing up a situation of conflict or something that you think might be contentious, and seeing how each one of them responds to it in terms of how you can resolve as a group how to move forward with that particular person or that problem.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. So we have about 5 minutes left. In the absence of questions, but keep putting questions in the chat. Hannah and I have some recommended reading for you. Before that, are there any salient points we want to cover, Hannah, just to wrap up before we suggest some reading?
I think, I meant to share, but I like to look at what is the monthly nut as you're taking on a new employee, if that's what the question, or a new partner. What is that going to do to the financial picture, like how much, I call it the monthly nut, it's the monthly break even point. What is that number going to look like when you take on that person? And I have a spreadsheet that I often use with clients that is very person based in terms of each person we add to the staff. We're spreading the load of some of these other things, like our insurance might cost the same. Our professional liability insurance and our rent might be the same, but then we're adding people that will help pay for all those bills. And so I try to look at what is that number that we need, and then I turn those same numbers around and say, now what would each of those people bill at, and how much do I think we can utilize them on billable projects? Is it 80%? Is it 70%? Is it a partner and they're only 50%? And so I try to look at those, and then I come up with a monthly number for where we're aiming to invoice. So if our costs are just 10,000 per month, we should be aiming hopefully to actually invoice maybe 15,000. So we're putting money towards our bonuses and our end of year and bigger outlays that might come down the road, like big photography projects, big marketing projects. So I try to look at those two numbers constantly and bring them. And then as a new person is added, maybe it goes up to 15,000 now per month. So what does that mean for, we can't just invoice 15,000 anymore. We need to look at more. But Michael, I want to make sure we have time for the recommendations you had, which are so great in terms of places to look for the resources and the books.
Oh, the resources. Yeah. Well, so I highly recommend a book that helped me when I launched my practice many years ago. Rena Klein, FAIA, wrote a wonderful book called The Architect's Guide to Small Firm Management, Making Chaos Work for You. It's a really great, deep book with all kinds of information that I think you'll find really valuable. Hannah recommends, and Christine Carter's The Sweet Spot. And Hannah, can you give us a bit of information?
Yeah, this is a book that I read as I was launching my own business, and it is about learning about your rhythms and when you need to concentrate on certain types of work to be the most efficient. So it was in reaction to that book that was like the 4-hour work week or something. And it was more about that most people can't get to a 4-hour work week, but actually what you can get to is to learn, well, I design best in the morning. And so I should block off on my calendar at least 3 days a week that I have my own personal design charrettes in the morning, or I am really good at meetings, but I fizzle out at 3 p.m. So I shouldn't take meetings after 3 p.m. On a regular basis. And I thought it was really enlightening, and it had some good practices for those of us that need practice and habit.
That's great. And just building good habits and knowing when you're strong and when you're not, and what to do when you're not, because you still got to do stuff. I recommend entrearchitect.com. That's Mark Arlo Page's podcast and blog. Super rich. It's a goldmine of information, and it's a nationwide community that is focused on the small entrepreneurial architect. It's not for big firms. Big firms, stay away. It's just for us. Mm-hmm. So I highly recommend it. They're just lots of interviews, and they have a chat, and they're on Facebook and every other social media platform. But the point is, it's a terrific resource as you conduct your practice. The last thing is and then also Practice of Architecture, Practice Disrupted. Evelyn Lee does this wonderful with Janine Chastain. They produce this fantastic podcast and a website and blog on disrupting practice and evolving emerging practice. The last thing is the AIA San Francisco Small Firms Committee. I've been a member for a long time. We talk about things that about how to submit plans and navigate the building DBI and planning in San Francisco and in Oakland and the peninsula. And where do I get this Marvin window that's got an 11-week lead time? And what can I use instead? It's just everything. It's super granular. Contact AIA San Francisco and ask if you can become a member. There are hundreds of there's at least 100, if not 200 architects that ask questions by the dozen every day about the smallest and largest issues. I don't have anything else. Are there any closing comments?
Only to say thank you. That was a fantastic presentation. You covered so much material. So I'm really grateful for both of you for contributing your time and your expertise. It was wonderful.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's our pleasure. It gives Hannah and I a chance to share the screen again.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Ursula and AIA East Bay. It's been my pleasure and our pleasure to join you.
Thank you.
We're indebted. Thank you. Okay. And
Okay.
with that, we are hosting an event on Thursday evening at the office of the San Francisco East Bay at 6 o'clock, and we have a panel of 3 principals from 3 small firms in the Bay Area. So it'd be great if anybody's online that is able to attend in person or call in. It is a hybrid event. So Hannah and Michael, if you're free, feel free to join in.
Well, thank you, Ursula. That's very kind of you.
Yeah, and thanks for everybody who stuck in there a few extra minutes for Michael and I just put our emails in the chat. So if someone has additional question or wants to get in touch, that's where we are.
Great.
Brilliant.
Well, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Hannah
Right.
and Michael.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.